Good morning. How you guys doing? Good? How did you like this super deep name tag question? It was a really good icebreaker without any coffee. We thought about asking you instead, when was the last time you cried? We thought that would be pretty good. We're here to talk about empathy. I'm Kate Hanisian from Design Impact.
I'm Ramsey Ford.
And we're just going to talk a little bit about the topic of empathy, but not because we are empathy experts, not because we know necessarily any more than all of you do, but because the work that we do most days asks us to tap into that. So we're just going to share a little bit about how we build empathy into our work, and in particular how it intersects with the design process and the work that we do. But then we want to make sure we give you a chance. So we have a little activity that we're going to do afterwards to give you a chance to talk to your neighbor. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, I think. Ooh. Okay. I will just do this. Yes. Thanks. So the reason we're here is we run an organization called Design Impact. So we are a nonprofit social innovation firm. And what that means is that we work with teachers, we work with educators, we work with nonprofit leaders, we work with community members, we work with philanthropists to tackle some really complex, pressing social issues. So we work on things like youth experiencing homelessness, or families experiencing poverty, or how do we get more folks into the workforce? So those are some of the issues that we tackle. And there's really kind of two main things that we really care about when we do that work, which are creativity and inclusivity. That's what we feel whenever we're working on these complex social problems. Those are the two elements we feel have to be there. Creativity, because we really need divergent approaches, right? When we're looking at these complex social issues, we have to look at them differently. If we want to do something different, we have to approach it differently. And so a lot of what we do is bringing in creative tools to the folks that we work with to look at the problems in a new way. The second is inclusivity, right? We feel really, really passionately that the voice of the end user, the voice of the community member that's going to be affected by any solution, that's going to be affected by any implementation, has a right to be at that table. Business has done a great job of including end user voice, right? We do a great job in business finding out how women might interact with their Tide bottle, for example, and designing it that way. We do a great job, right? Giving that dignity, but in the social sector, that's not always there. So what we're really passionate about is inclusive approaches to complex social problems. And we do it not just because creativity is fun, which it is, and not just because inclusivity is the right way to do things, which we believe it is, but because we think it leads to better outcomes in our work. I forget what the next slide is. Yes. So even though we have learned a lot over the last 6 years doing this work, most days we're just two fools trying to figure out what we're doing. This is a picture of us about 1 month after living in a small village in India. We had just bought this motorcycle and some really ugly sunglasses, and we're excited about hitting the road, right, together. And what we were doing was we were really at that point just trying to figure out, so my background is in the social sector, Ramsey's background is in design. And we were really passionate about figuring out what does it look like when those two things come together, and how can we practice that work together. We lived in India, so the first 3 years of our work was based in India. 2 years of that was in a small village, working very closely with a grassroots organization. And in that time, we really learned about the combination between empathy and design and how those things feed into one another. So we're going to talk about that today with a couple little just stories about how that plays out in our work. But first, just to talk about empathy, in design, you've probably seen a lot of these words. We talk about participatory design or user feedback or co-creation, right? These are the terms we use, and they're great terms. We use them too. But when we really boil it down, the way we think about empathy is that empathy is really meaning just with. Do it with somebody. And sometimes we approach in design, we sometimes approach users or end users as somebody that we're trying to get information from, versus design with. So we talk a lot about what is it like to feel with, be with, sit with, laugh with, cry with, whatever it is, and how can we bring that into our work? Because out of that real relationship, we think innovation can really happen in an equitable way. So I think with that.
Nice.
It's you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. So what we wanted to do is share just like 5 really quick stories from our work around this concept of empathy and how it means designing with. And so the first one is know what it tastes like. And does not like what it's doing. Maybe it's too low. There it is. Which in other words means consider all elements of the user experience. So this is an image from a project we did in India around childhood nutrition. We had a partner who was providing daycare for about 350 kids, and they realized that a lot of those kids were malnourished or underweight. And they were providing the government subsidized meal, but it wasn't enough to kind of make those nutritional ends meet. And they didn't have any more money to spend on the program. So it's a great opportunity for design to kind of look for a creative solution. And so our fellow on this project started by going shopping with the woman who bought the food, finding out where she shopped and what she'd like to buy. And she sat down and made food with the cooks to figure out what they liked to cook and how they cooked and what tools and mechanisms they used. She talked to parents about nutrition and what their perspectives was on it. And obviously she talked a lot to kids. And she came up with this idea called the healthy latte, which is basically a cookie full of nutritious stuff that'll make kids gain weight. And so once she had that idea, we didn't just say, all right, well, this is the best idea. It makes logical sense. We took that idea out, we tested it with kids like this young girl to see what she thought about it. And she did not like this laddu. We took this to parents to see what they thought about it. We went shopping for all of the supplies to see if they were easy to get. We sat down and made the laddus with the cooks to make sure that they were involved in that process. And if we had just stopped with kind of where we logically had that solution and said, that's great, this would probably not have become a sustained project. But because we actually went through this process of understanding all of these senses, from what it tastes like to what it felt like to make these, to how complicated it was to buy the supplies for them, this is a project that's still sustaining itself 3.5 years later. Just return. I'll just hit it.
So next is make a bucket list, or in other words, understand the hopes and dreams of those folks that you are designing for. So this is a project we're actually currently working on now with the University of Cincinnati Center for Community Engagement and Project Connect, which works on youth experiencing homelessness in Cincinnati public schools. And what we're trying to figure out in particular is how can we better support youth experiencing homelessness while they are in school, and what can UC do about that? And so we're looking at what kind of program, how can we, versus a traditional mentor-mentee relationship, how can we do something different? And so instead of sitting around a room with ourselves and coming up what we thought were expert solutions, we decided to listen to kids and talk to kids for a while. So we went to a 6th grade class with a lot of kids that have been in and out of different kinds of homes, but all 6th graders. And we decided to focus on middle school, because middle school is the most vulnerable period, so for all of us, right, let alone if you're moving from house to house. And so instead of just saying, what are your hopes and dreams, what would you like out of a program, we wanted to get kind of some of those deeper responses. So we taught them what a bucket list was. And then they made bucket lists, and we made them too and shared them. And then we sat down one-on-one and talked with them. And this kid was my favorite. Well, he first told me about how he wanted to be the world's first bionic man, which was awesome. But then if you can see up here, his number one thing he wanted to do was crack time travel. And we were using something we call the 5 whys, where we kind of consistently unpack why time travel, right? So, well, what is it about time travel you want to do? And he says, well, I really just want to go back in time so people can be happy. I'm like, well, what do you mean people can be happy? He's like, well, everybody in my life, including me, like the reason we're sad sometimes is because we've made mistakes. We can't fix them. So if I could crack time travel, everybody could go back in time and be happy again. They could relive and not make the same mistakes they made, which was an incredibly lovely thing to say, but also made us realize that a lot of the things kids are struggling with at this particular age, right, have to do with needing to reconcile things to themselves or things with their family. And so we are building now reconciliation and forgiveness into what that program would be, which we would not have done had we not really pulled that out in kind of a creative or different way.
So now we're going to go back to India. We're going to take a smoke break and also get some Sweet's facial hair. And what this is really about is taking the time to build relationships. We were working on a clean burning charcoal briquette social enterprise centered in rural India with our partners at Odom. And this is specifically our key person there, Ilavar Su, who is going to be kind of leading that program from Odom's perspective. And early on in that process, we had to develop a new cook stove to test briquettes in. And so we woke up one morning, we drove about an hour and a half to the nearby city of Madurai to kind of work with some manufacturers to make that prototype. And I was used to this perspective where when you want a prototype made, you send the CAD file across the street, somebody prints it and sends it back to you later that day and you're done. And that was not how this went. So it actually took us about a week to build this prototype. And a lot of that was because we were working with individual shops where one guy would have a lathe and that was his tool. And then he would have to partner with the guy that had the welder because that was his tool. And he had to have to partner with the guy that had the grinder because that was his tool. And so kind of bringing everybody together took a little bit of time. Also, materials weren't there. We couldn't run to Home Depot, so we had to kind of find what we could find to make the product out of. And there's also rolling brownouts in Madurai. So for multiple hours a day, just nobody could do any work because there wasn't any electricity to do that work with. But what I also found out during that week of waking up at dawn and driving an hour and a half to the city to sit in a kind of a dusty alleyway waiting for people to do some work was that if we didn't actually physically go there, they wouldn't work on our project. Because as soon as somebody else walked in with a project and some cash, they were going to work on that project. So if we wanted it done, we had to be there ourselves. And at first, that was a really frustrating experience because it's like, oh my God, it's a really simple stove. Why are we taking so long to do this? There's so many other things I could be doing. And then I realized it was a really great opportunity to share time with Ilavar Su. I think somewhere in about day 2 and cup of tea 75, I realized that we should just talk more about who we are and what we're hoping to get out of this. And so I learned about his family, learned about why he's doing this work, what his expectations are for it, how it relates to his community, and shared similar stories about myself. And while that prototype was really essential to getting that project started so we could test briquettes, it took us 2 years to get that prototype briquette all the way to a viable business that was being implemented in rural India. And most of that was based on the relationship that we had developed at that time. So building that relationship is really a key part of successfully designing that product.
Okay, next we want to talk about getting on the bus or spending time in someone else's shoes. I think often when we think of empathy, we think about getting in someone else's shoes. This picture, just to be in all honesty, it's the best picture we have of a bus. But it is not. This is a picture from India. I'm going to talk about a project that actually is taking place or just finished in Cincinnati that we've been working on. We're working with advanced manufacturing. So what you've got in northern Kentucky is tons of jobs in advanced manufacturing, and they pay really well. And some of them are pretty entry level, so I mean they're easy to get into with just a little bit of training. And you've also got, as you know, really high poverty rate here in Cincinnati, families that are experiencing poverty that need jobs. So the goal of the project is how do you connect this to this, right? How do you connect these families experiencing poverty, particularly single mothers is what the project was looking at, into these careers in advanced manufacturing. And they've been trying to do it for years and honestly are really stuck. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But so what we did is, again, instead of sitting in a room and deciding we were experts and knew the answer, we went out and we talked to people, right? So we talked to women experiencing poverty that had jobs, women that didn't, women that were in advanced manufacturing, manufacturers themselves, employers, social workers, to understand the problem. And we kept hearing, there's a lot of things we kept hearing, but one of the things we kept hearing was it's too hard to get there with public transportation because these manufacturing facilities are pretty far down 75 South, if you're familiar. So, you know, what we did is we got up and rode the bus ourselves. So got up around 4 a.m. Trying to figure out, so most of the women that are being recruited into these jobs are coming from Newport, Covington. And so we mapped out where are the daycare facilities that are open at that hour, which are hardly any, and then mapped out the bus routes. And we missed the bus. And then the second time we couldn't get there on time, and the third time we got there about 20 minutes late to work. But because of the way the buses work and because of the way daycare hours work, it's almost, if you had more than one child, it's impossible, basically, to get to these jobs on time. So something that nobody, you know, they've been working on this for years, but just by getting in the shoes of folks and riding the actual bus route, we realized, like, this actually is kind of impossible to do. So I think there's power in that observation and that user experience perspective when it comes to building empathy in design.
And our last story is about blowing bubbles or having fun with new people. And so this is a picture from City Heights over in Covington. And last year we were doing a project with the Housing Authority of Covington and the Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission through the United Way of Greater Cincinnati. And what they were looking at was City Heights and trying to get more kids involved in Head Start classes. And when you look at City Heights, it sounds like its name. It's on a hill and it's hard to get to. It's like one road that goes up there. So our partners logically said, hey, this has got to be about transportation. And so let's start thinking about some really creative things we can do to get people off of City Heights to Head Start classes. And that's what we got to do. We said, that sounds like a really great idea, but let's go talk to some people first. And they said, well, we can't talk to people because you see, we're the housing authority, so we're kind of landlords and no one really wants to talk to us when we go there. Nobody trusts us. And so we started thinking about what would it look like in your neighborhood if someone you didn't know came in, and how would you want to engage with them? And so we started talking about like what would be fun, what would bring people outside, what would connect people. And somehow that conversation diverged into the person that actually owned a bubble machine, which is just someone that everyone should have in their lives. And so we took a minivan and a bubble machine and some balloons and some banners, and no joke, the team just drove around the neighborhood, spewing bubbles out of the back of this minivan until kids were like, they want some. There's got to be ice cream in there or something, right? And so they, and when the kids came out, this is a little creepy, but they were like, we've got these tiny bottles of bubbles and we'll give you one if you bring your parents out here. And so the kids went back and the parents came out, and I'm sure there's nothing illegal about any of this. But what happened was because it was around this fun experience, parents were like, what is going on? And they were like, well, we represent Head Start, and we're just trying to build some attention and try to understand what people think about that. And what they learned was that people didn't have any issues with transportation. Like, people were getting off the hill to go to jobs, to meet with friends, to go shopping. That wasn't what was keeping people away from Head Start. What was keeping people away from Head Start was the fact that when people saw their 3-year-old and they thought of Head Start as school, they couldn't make the connection. And so this enabled the Head Start teachers to kind of make that connection, explain that Head Start's play-based, and show people what that was like. And within 3 months, they were able to triple their enrollment from that space because they had fun with people.
Great. So just to kind of come back to that idea of empathy being with, I think that, for us, that often means this idea of building relationship and being vulnerable ourselves. I think that's why, in all seriousness, we put that on here. It's really hard to have those kinds of conversations, but when we bring ourselves to the same place that the communities we're working with, it can be a really powerful thing. And so I don't know if any of you are familiar with Peter Block, but he's an incredible community engagement specialist that's lived here in Cincinnati, but known around the world. And he has this idea that if you should be sitting knee to knee, whatever you're doing, whoever you're talking to, if you're building a relationship, you should be sitting knee to knee, and that it's important to break that awkward space a little bit, where we have these boundaries that keep us from being able to get to those deeper root causes and root things that we're all really dealing with every day. And so we're about to go through an activity where we're going to ask you to sit knee to knee. And there's a couple things that we want you to think about when you're doing that activity. So one is prioritizing depth in a conversation. So often in small talk and situations like this, we don't prioritize depth. We prioritize what's surface or what's easy to say. So we're going to ask you to prioritize depth. We're going to ask you to follow the conversation. So often in design and research, we want to understand our end users, so we have a survey or we have a focus group, and we have questions we want people to answer. Instead, we want you to just follow the conversation where it goes, wherever it may lead, which is a little bit more scary because you don't know where it's happening. And the third is focus on meaning. Again, this is about paying attention to what is really meaningful to someone and going down that path. And while you do that, there's kind of 3 things we want you to do as well. Evoke stories from people. So we know, right, that when humans are telling stories, it's when they're really talking out of their hearts. It's when they're talking about what they really value. And that's where insight really lies. So evoke stories for the person that you're going to be talking with. Second, encourage emotions. We also know that when people are experiencing emotion, they're laughing or they're crying or they're feeling something, there's something there, right? That's where the really good stuff lies. So encourage that in your conversation. And finally, question statements. So often people make a statement like, I love Cincinnati, or Cincinnati is X, for example, or creativity is X. question those, because where people's statements lie, what they believe is truth, is where we can really unpack their values as people to really understand what their empathic perspective is. So great.
Awesome. So enough of us talking. What we're going to do now is a really easy activity around empathic conversations. And the first part of this is to find a partner. But the instructions I want to give you is please don't just turn to the friend you came with. Please find someone who's nearby, so we're not going to all go crazy here. Find somebody who's nearby that you don't know at all, or at least don't know very well. And then just make some eye contact so you guys know that you're going to be partners. All right? So go ahead and do that for a second. We'll get back up on that stage. All right, all right. I didn't bring my gong.
All right.
You want to do the clap? You want to do the clap?
No.
Okay. So, sorry, this is gonna be a total cluster. All right, so if I can get your attention back up here real quick. What you are going to do is that you are going to conduct an interview with your partner or just have a conversation, which is what we're going for. The topic of your conversation is creativity, because we're at Creative Mornings. And what you want to do is just to get to know them better in general, but then specifically their relationship to creativity. Like Kate said, you don't need a guidebook. You can just ask questions and have that conversation. However, we find that some people appreciate having a few questions to work off of. So as you're doing this, think about, how do they define creativity? Do they think of themselves as creative? Why or why not? What expands or blocks creativity? And how could you be more creative in your work? All right, are some potential topics. Don't feel like you have to answer these, and follow that conversation. We're gonna let you go in one direction for about 5 minutes, and then we're gonna switch you. You'll see the giant words switch up here. When that happens, please switch, and we'll do about another 5 minutes. It's really short, but we only have 45 minutes to start with, all right? So go ahead and start your conversations.
All right.
All right, so I'm glad everybody had really great conversations.
Thank you.
I know that once you go, I know, right? Once you go, there's actually, I taught a theory of industrial design class last year at DAP, and this is actually way more respectful than that class ever was to me. So this is great. What we're going to do now real quickly is you talk to somebody just for 5 minutes, okay? And then you learned a little bit about them and their relationship to creativity. And the next thing I want you to do is really quickly, I want you to think about if you had like $25 and you wanted to get them a gift based on that conversation. Just something simple that you learned about them and you thought they would really appreciate whatever that is. I want you to think about that, and I want you to either write that or draw that on this thing from your envelope, all right? If everybody got that,
But
we've
don't
got
let them see it.
we've
Don't
got
let
some
them see
Sharpies
it
that are
yet.
coming around here. So
Don't let them see it, right?
don't show it to them just yet.
Here you
Just
go.
write it down.
Yep.
So quick question, did anybody receive like a gift? They're like, wow, that's an amazing gift. Yeah, can somebody share one out? Yeah, what was it?
I got a month-free Spotify subscription. And the background is the interesting part, because I mentioned that I'm a graphic designer and that I don't like a lot of interaction, so I normally put my headphones on and ignore people. And so she said, one, this is something to listen to when you're in your headphone zone, and two, you need to, she put a contingency on it that I have to get playlists from the people around me.
Nice.
So that I can learn about them while I listen.
That's a great gift.
Did you guys hear that back there?
So he got a Spotify membership because he likes to focus on his work and not talk to other people. But to crack that open a little bit more, there was a mandate that he actually get playlists from everybody around him, so he has to interact with people as well. It's a good gift.
That's a
So I'm
great
glad
gift.
you like that. So we got a lot of people who got good gifts. Did anybody feel like they gave a great gift? They're just like, man, I nailed that. Anybody? I mean, now you know.
Yeah.
But you.
Yeah, he told me the story of something that his mother said, and so my gift to him was putting that quote on a trophy, which was, "You used to be an asshole, but now you're a professor."
Right. What's the difference?
Awesome.
You know, and you gave a great one.
I did. As creatives, I met with Becky behind me, and as creatives, we always stop ourselves when you're in the process of creation because you're worried about what other people are going to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I gave her self-confidence.
Nice. I mean,
Awesome.
we got to talk later. Yeah.
I need some of that.
Yeah. You want to share one? Or you want to share with that one? Oh, no. Okay. Well, that's awesome. And that brings us back to this final point we want to make. And that's that empathy is about knowing and being known. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about with. It's not just knowing what somebody wants, but it's also being known by that person. It's a two-way street that involves vulnerability. And when you have that, when you can actually share an experience with someone, that's when you can build empathy with them. And that's when you can do great creative design work. So thanks a lot for your time. And we've got a couple minutes for questions if you want to ask any questions. Or you don't have to. Cool.
Yeah.
Sure. I like how you use the backstory of your experience in India to help prepare this conversation. How do you encourage people to empathize with people across cultures?
I mean,
Go for
you
it.
got to go one?
You were about to say something. Say what
I
you
mean, I
want to
think
say.
just like you just get to know them where they are, and like most people, there's points of relation, and sometimes they're not as thick as like someone that you grew up right next to, but there's always some place where you can connect, and especially when you're working on a project, I think it's a really great space because we're as much as we're building relationships to build relationships, we're also trying to create new things and projects, and that's an orientation that's really conducive to bringing people together and build relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd also say too that like seeking those things that make us all human and starting there, right? We all find certain things funny, even across languages or moments where you're not even speaking the same language, but enjoying the same thing, finding those core things that make us human wherever we are. And then on the flip side of that, I think in a weird way, working across any sort of boundary actually makes us immediately more vulnerable, particularly if we're working in other contexts, right? Because we are so ignorant. So it's recognizing that ignorance and just embracing it, and then makes you much more curious when you realize I don't have to know. It's okay if I don't know the language or I'm not an expert about X. And so I think embracing that curiosity and that vulnerability versus I should be an expert in this space, I think can kind of help deepen that empathic experience, in my opinion. Yeah, Megan.
Any advice for young designers who are endeavoring to work in the civic or social sector?
Do projects, I think, is keep working in that space, following your passion, and trying to make the best of it. It's still a small space, but it's growing, and so it's not the easiest place to find paid work in, to be honest, and that's usually the challenge, but it is getting bigger. And I think that organizations like us are looking for people who are passionate about it and show that passion through action.
Yeah, and I'd also say I think in that space that even if you can't find a social design project to work on, or just demonstrating that you do have experience working on social issues of whether you're a mentor or you do something in your external life outside of your paid gig, that demonstrates, because all of that you build knowledge about the social sector, right, and about communities affected by poverty and those issues, and those are really complex systemic things. So the more you can demonstrate that you've actually spent time working in those spaces and understanding those things and working with those sorts of people, whether that's just volunteering or whatever, I think can help. If you're already a designer, I think you've got the design part down, what's then working on that other piece.
I'm just wondering if you can give an example. So we work in social services, so there's a lot of thinking around people and their families and the communities. And as designers, as professionals, maybe you can give an example of how you personally curb your own ego and instinct to want to jump in and give the right answer to kind of speed it up, or that feeling where you're like, I know the answer to this, just let me help.
Yeah.
Give an example of when you can step back, how you personally do that.
I mean, I'm just largely ignorant of a lot of things, so it's not a problem for me. But Kate, do you have a good answer for that?
I I think what you're saying is really important, you know, and I think it's really hard. Like ideas are exciting. Ideas are more exciting than process, right? And when you have an idea, it sets you on fire, you know, and that's something that you really want to follow. I mean, I know even in ideation sessions when we hold with groups of people, like, you know, you put your idea up on the post-it, you're excited about that post-it, you know, you hope everyone else votes for it. I think part of that, I guess, for us is setting that. So we kind of set the standards with any project we start or any partner we work on. We talk about removing the expert mindset. We talk about starting with a beginner's mind and what does that mean. So laying the groundwork before starting with and recognizing, like, saying to your team, it is human to fall in love with your idea. Like, that is a human thing to do, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But what's more important is that it works for the people you're trying to affect. And so taking a step back, and so kind of setting that standard at the beginning and recognizing that's human and saying we're all going to work not to do that, at least to spend it for a little bit, I think can maybe help.
And so I think it's past 10 o'clock, so we should probably let everything roll, right? But appreciate everybody coming out. It was great talking to you.
Thank you very much. We'll be around.